kind of
Mhm.
got it. The way I'd envision this was just very informal, just based on the questions I'd asked
Mhm.
you. Then after that, when you send me the audio, I'm just literally going to cut out your answers and then obviously play with those in the editing to speak to, the greater narrative that I want to share.
Mhm.
So to share some context with you before we get in by way of introduction. I'm based here in South Africa, but I'm originally from Lesotho. It's a small enclave, landlocked country in South Africa. And I'm a recent graduate at the university here in Cape Town, where I was in the media department. And my research was focused a lot on the Black Lives Matter protests that were happening a few years ago.
Mhm.
And from that, I managed to kind of develop a cultural framework that a lot of youth activists could use in terms of mobilizing young people and engaging them in a lot of the anti-racial and decolonial
Mhm.
movement and work that's been going on locally. So I'm not really, experienced in the space as yet, only just getting my teeth sort of sunk into this space. But in South Africa, it's probably been ongoing for the past 5, 6 years since the Rhodes Must Fall, Fees Must Fall movement. But since then, obviously, I've been on my own journey of transformation, and that's how I discovered the conference at Northwest University. Sorry, I'll just mute that. At Northwest University, because it led me down my own journey of learning my ancestry. And in Lesotho, our indigenous knowledge is transferred and preserved via oral culture. And part of the ways we connect with our ancestors is through our totems. And how I got to find out about Linda Tucker was because I'm from the Lion Clan in Lesotho.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's wonderful.
Yes, the Bataung clan, as we're called. And in some of our oral culture and totems, there's a lot of reference to celestial bodies, but it's never really been explained to us in any meaningful way other than just being oratory culture. And I was very impressed by words that one of the panel speakers was sharing, Zulu Matabo Zulu. He was giving a lot more in-depth explanation about these planets, Jupiter and Sirius, and how these praise poems were actually going beyond just artistic expression, but actually talking about a deeper divine connection with these celestial beings. And I'd known about him before, but that's who I really came to the conference to hear more about. I knew a little bit about Dwayne Hamacher as well, and Dr. Mattel, but I'd never really delved much deeper into their work. But lo and behold, I found you as well, and I was very, captivated by the things that you were saying. And that's just basically the context I wanted to frame this around, because in working towards this framework I've built called Ubuntufuturism, it's mainly just sort of been focused on using the media as a third space to, create new narratives for indigenous peoples to create their own story. So one of my mentors, Tyson Yunkaporta, he's a indigenous scholar based in Australia, and he's got this book called Sand Talk. And I was fortunate enough to get an interview with him last year. And in his book, he talks about celestial bodies as well, and how Aboriginal and indigenous communities also used to have ceremonies based around the stars, and that's how they transferred their knowledge to next generations. And as we were talking, that's where I kind of felt like my framework was kind of lacking, because, the media is very fleeting. Everybody can create a hashtag around something viral and gain momentum around it. But as soon as that dies down, the conversation generally wanes as well. So I'm trying to really develop something with a bit more longevity based around our indigenous calendars. And the South African New Year, well, the African New Year, as they say, started yesterday. But ours sort of started about a month ago. And, unfortunately, Zulu Matabo Zulu didn't share too much about what Basotho used to do around the New Year to observe these celestial bodies and what kind of rituals they'd engage in. But, just to tie back to what I was saying about Tyson Young Porter and developing this framework, he was really of the encouragement that ceremony is the way to go. And, a lot of people, at first I was really framing it around the creative economy, film, literature, music, all of that. But the thing with ceremonies is a lot more participatory, and it requires people's presence and engagement. And that's how there's real transfer of knowledge and, production of new meanings around these sacred events and sacred times. And that's how these pedagogies, are actually transferred to new generations, and how you create new pedagogies. So, in encouraging me to pursue that path, I'd never actually known anything about what a ceremonialist is, but he'd encouraged me down that path. And I was really looking at it from, the space of festivals or events or something like that. That's just going to gather a bunch of indigenous people, but not really at the deeper level in terms of connecting it with the indigenous knowledge. And that's where I thought that conference would be the last piece to the puzzle. And, turns out it was, but it wasn't by way of the person I thought it would be. What you seem to be doing was more in tune with exactly what I'd like to have all my work culminate in. I mean, the media can get people talking and get people excited and, mobilize them to a certain extent, but it really is a decolonial work at the end of the day. So if it doesn't tie down into those ancestral, celestial bodies of knowledge, then it just becomes any old other festival, and that's what I'm trying to avoid at all. So in my own path, I've also been pursuing like traditional healing, like the different modalities of Ubungoma, as they call it here, Sangoma work and so forth. And that's how I learned about Linda. And coming from the Bataung clan, I was very keen to go to Timbavate to go get initiated in that. So with that all said, was there anything you wanted to say before I got into my questions?
I'm very excited for your journey, and I'm super happy that that you are taking all of these steps and following all of the signs and the intuitions and the passions and the feeling also that it's like it's this and it can't quite be this, but it has, I'm just really keen on your journey. So thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. So yes, maybe just for my own ignorance and everyone else who will be listening to this, you describe yourself as an ecstatic ceremonialist. So I was just hoping you could elaborate on that and just, touch on themes of spiritual art and how all those tie in. Does it require one to get initiated into it, or is it something anybody can get into, and those sorts of things?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, and that really is the heart of my work, which I've started to understand it that way relatively recently, in the sense that I don't know, ceremony is. I mean, I come from a musical performance and so on background, and there was a point where when I got extremely sick, and I had the healer's call and all of that. And that's when I started to move into ceremony spaces, plant ceremonies, indigenous traditional ceremonies. That was mostly in Arizona, in South America. And then also in Poland, we have traditional Slavic ancestral ceremonies. That's also when I met Malidoma Somé. I moved into an understanding, not just an understanding, but, a lot of the spiritual work is experiential. You can't learn certain things without experiencing them. And I think that's where that's a huge part of when we talk about decolonizing knowledge systems. It's not just this, oral literature versus written literature kind of thing. It's actually the fact that in order to learn, the knowledge has to come inside of you and change you. It can't just be on the level of here. That's why when we talk about initiation, it's not that you can only be initiated this way or that way. It's that there's that whole process of dancing with the knowledge and having it transform you. So I started seeing, you know, I did come from that, from that background of not knowing much about ritual or ceremony. And then I started seeing how a ritual or ceremony, it can change things in 5 minutes, in 10 minutes, you can do a ritual and reality changes immediately. And when I had those experiences, I thought, wow, this is really incredibly powerful. And then also me as a musician, starting to do music in ceremony and realizing that we are also, everything in our civilization currently, this global over culture, is cheapening the most powerful modalities that we have, like sound, you know, like vibration. What does it actually do, you know? And then you hear those stories, like in South America, the stories about the shamans who, you know, they can heal you with a song, they can straighten out all the things and clear you out with a song. They can also kill you with a song, you know, they can tangle you up just as easily. And so there's just that sense of, there's so much power in it that these days, it's just, oh, are people happy listening to me? Are they not happy listening to me? Or, you know, do I have enough likes or enough clicks or whatever it is? That has absolutely nothing to do with what you can actually do. The power of life and death is in that thing that we now just call, oh, it's entertainment, you know? But then there's the ceremonial aspect of it, the aspect of, yeah, people coming together, but when we talk about community building or gathering or rebuilding connections these days, I find that, you know, people are missing each other, where we want to come together again, but we don't know how. And then there's that aspect of with indigenous knowledge. And if you look at African tradition, you know, what's called African traditional religion, all of those knowledge systems that are based on when we come together, we have an awareness of the ancestors are coming together. We are coming together in spaces also that are already populated by the invisible world or spiritual beings, and we have to be in conversation with them. So what I discovered in my work when I started developing so-called ceremony theater, because of course these were ceremonies that were coming through me, that you can't really say they are completely, you know, they're not traditional ceremonies in that I've learned you do it like this, this, and this, and this. They were very based on inspiration, but it was inspiration that came out of my own ceremonies or rituals. So what would happen is I would go to a sacred place and I would be given an inspiration. I would be given a story usually. And then the idea was this story usually had in it some kind of a problem. You know, so for example, when I did Nzara, hunger, which came out of Great Zimbabwe, and which was told the story of the moon and also of the big hunger that is not just, it's not just a physical hunger, it's a spiritual hunger, an emotional hunger, all of these hungers. And I was instructed, you know, you have to tell this story because it's the telling of the story that feeds the hunger, you know. Or when I was in Poland and I went to Ślęża mountain and I was given the story of the Slavic goddess of the earth and her journey of getting lost. And it was like, if you tell this story, she can get found again. And her getting found isn't just a human thing, but it manifests in human beings in that area. That's the idea of ceremony, is that it's not, it affects all the worlds at once. And it's the most demanding work, which is why I think I find it so compelling all of the time, because you need to work at the same time, you need to work in the material world and in the spiritual world. At the same time, you have to have that awareness, like 1 foot in here, 1 foot in there. You have to know what things mean, and you have to be aware of the ritual act, you know. So for example, we say, I mean, in theater comes from ritual and ceremony, but a lot of that has become very diluted. So people now, they think that theater or film, it's pretending, you know. They don't realize that in the context of a ritual, everything you do is meant to have resonance in all of the worlds. So in a ritual play, if you kill somebody, you're killing somebody in all of the worlds. For better or for worse, maybe you want a resurrection play, maybe whatever it is. But the same thing if you are healing something in a ritual play, you are making a gesture that is then supported by all of the spirits to heal that thing in all of the worlds. And so the resonance of those acts goes way beyond what we think of, this human thing of like, oh, do I feel okay or do I not feel okay? And I think, with the most recent, the Nyamatsatsi festival, which was the star ceremony, which was one of the most confusing processes for me, because all of these other ceremonies that I'd been doing were location oriented. So there was always the sense that the ceremony had to come back ultimately to that sacred place. But with the stars, it was like, they're up there. So how do you do that? But that's why the feeling that it had to happen in Zimbabwe, and an emphasis on not just the importance of Zimbabwe in the grand cosmic scale of things, but the relationship of this place also to the stars. The fact that an alignment of the stars and Zimbabwe has resonance around the world, somewhere, somehow, which is also where the lions come in. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yes, it does. Thank you so much. And I was resonating a lot with that. I mean, in my own journey this year, I went for my very first ayahuasca journey in January. And that was powerful because it was in my community. It wasn't, in the South American Amazon jungle somewhere where, you come with certain preconceived ideas about what you're going to go through. And, in all fairness, this shaman did have a very well set up ceremonial space. And it's so profound because everything you're saying about sound completely resonated, because she had all these singing bowls and djembe drums in there. And throughout the entire experience, the sonic modality was a huge part of it. So just to follow up on that question before I lead into my next one, wanted to ask about that, because she's very particular on acoustics, vibrations, energies, and all that. And I know in Zimbabwe, they pay homage to the mbira as the ancestral instrument, which, has certain songs that are played at certain times to wake up certain spirits. So on the opposite spectrum, she was saying, a lot of the music we listen to these days is tuned at incorrect frequencies, and it gets us in very worldly mindsets, which has no benefit for our spiritual development at all. So, on that note, as far as your preparation and development around ceremonies are concerned, are there any, do's and don'ts or best practices in order to get the most divine experience around it, and things that, you should avoid in order to, if you don't want to, upset the ancestors or do things that aren't in line with them? And I say that also because in my own journey as a traditional healer, they've also got certain instruments that they play, and certain drums, which are for certain spirits. Like in Ubuntufuturist specifically, there's different Nzunza spirits and Dao spirits, and they all get awoken by certain drums and patterns and so forth. So, what I'm also trying to get at is that not anybody can come with any old instrument and start saying, we're having an ancestral or ceremonial, we're having a divine ceremony here. So that's also what I wanted to touch on in terms of nuance and, what are the tools, if any, or elements to be used to really connect in the most purest way as possible, and the things that are just absolutely no that are not ecstatic ceremony.
Yeah, no, these are very, very good questions, and also things that I'm continually exploring, because you will have people who are very, very, very hardcore traditionalists, and they'll just say, I know it always has to be this way, otherwise it's not authentic, or it's not real, or the spirits will say no, or all those things. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have people who are completely, just, there's no such thing as tradition, we're just doing away with it. There's, it's a free spiritual country, leave me alone kind of thing. So I'm on neither end of the spectrum, because indeed, as you say, sound is specific. Instruments also are specific. They are tuned to certain spirits, to certain places, certain resonances. At the same time, there also seems to be, the best thing for a healer in a way to do is to know their own spirits and to never, ever, ever refuse their own spirits in whatever way that, in capacity that their spirits come through. My experience with that is very much that spirit has a way of being very innovative if it needs to. If it, you'll find, let's say during a plant ceremony, that let's say you happen to be somewhere and you just happen to not have any of your instruments, and then suddenly during the ceremony itself, let's say you hear some water dripping somewhere, and you hear that dun 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 dun, and the rhythm of it might serve as the thing that wakes up your spirit somewhere, somehow. That, of course, then you have the water, which is a very powerful entity anyway, and so on. It's like the spirits, if they are with you, if they are on your side, if they're supporting what you're doing, then they're going to make certain things possible, even in the impossible. That's one thing also that I've really learned through all of these years, is that spirit loves to show off. They love to do the impossible things. They love to put you in a situation where you're like, no, this is impossible. And they're like, yeah, you think so, but we're going to show you that it's not. So in that sense, they also don't like too much, like when everything is too easy or too predictable or too, too possible, right? But that being said, certainly, with the mbira, with the ngoma, with certain traditional instruments, you'll have, and certain specific songs. With ayahuasca, it's the same thing. There are certain songs that will wake up certain even worlds or certain spirits and certain places. And I've had a lot of those experiences as well. Also in particular, for example, with the Mondoro spirits, the lion spirits, this side in Zimbabwe, there are some specific songs where you just immediately feel, you're like, oh, okay, they're here. You can just feel that. But then there are debates, because they say, yeah, the music builds the bridge to the spirit world. But then they say, yeah, but then the spirit can come anytime, whenever it wants, because the spirit is the most powerful thing. So who actually needs the music? Is it the spirit that needs the music, or is it the human beings that need the music to open to the spirit? It's all of these kind of nuanced debates around that. But there's also in my experience, and maybe that's where the journey really comes in, the question of what is the journey of the healer, and that issue of all of the time, your intention. When I say intention, I don't even mean having a clear intention, because if you have inspiration is an intention. But is your heart truly wanting what is best, Because whenever you do ceremony, especially when you do these larger scale ceremonies, it's that thing of really being like, do I have the love in me for, let's say, all of humanity? Do I have it, Or can I ask the spirit to help me have it, so that the core of this ceremony, no matter what happens, is always on that wavelength? Because if I don't have it, or if I'm not open to it, or if the spirit doesn't grace me with it, then no matter what I do or how correct I am, there's issues. And then not only that, but then with every ceremony as well, there's the issue of protecting it, of really protecting it. Every ceremony has a very deep spiritual preparation, so it might be under the surface, in the sense that the people who come, let's say you call it a festival or all that thing, like what we did with the Nyamatsatsi festival, there was a lot of spiritual preparation also informing certain places, certain spirits, certain ancestors, a constant sense of, and also help us do things the right way, help us be respectful. We might not know how to be respectful. So there's a humility, also a humbleness that comes with all of it, because at the end of the day, what I've learned as well is that all of humanity right now, we are in this interesting moment of both crisis and revolution. deep crisis and spiritual revolution. I mean, you look at, even from your own journey, I mean, how amazing and compelling and wonderful, that a person like you is already doing all of these things, exploring all of these things, going on all of these pathways, and really having that clarity, where 10 years ago, 15 years ago, how many people were there like you, And so now, and the ancestry and all those things, and how do we learn these old knowledges? So there's a revolution that's happening, but it takes our creativity as much as it takes our, like we have to go into the past and the future simultaneously. We have to be very creative. We have to ask the spirit to help us be creative as the spirit is. And at the same time, we also have to be respectful to the so-called ways that things are done. So it's a very compelling time to be alive. Yeah, in that sense.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I once again totally resonate with all that. And just by the way, I did get my Mbira for the first time this year as well.
Oh, nice, nice.
I've been learning, but I mean, like most urbanized youth across the continent and elsewhere, I grew up on hip hop and all that worldly music. And, to a certain extent, it's also formed my creative capabilities. So creating a new sound, I also wanted to pay homage and reverence to the indigenous. And that's why I got the Mbira, to say that, not everything is going to be, an 808 drum or some synthetic trap beat or everything like that. And apart from yourself, really, there's only one scholar, and he's based here in South Africa, that works with indigenous instruments and music as a healing modality, who's really making progressive music, well, cutting edge, if I could call it that, just to say that, it's using the indigenous and the old and the ancestral to create something new to these times. And I completely resonated with everything you were saying about the spirits as well. And, whether it's us or them that need us, and how, it's very nuanced to kind of tell the difference sometimes, because, in some schools of thought, it's for us to get into that trance, to hear them clearly. And in some others, it's for them to be appeased and to show up. But on that note, I wanted to obviously now speak about them, and specifically the Star Ceremony. And it's all very exciting and new to me because, unlike astrology, which, is very esoteric, with the indigenous perspective, it's very rooted more in locale and in how people of specific locations read the stars in their specific sites. So from that perspective, I wanted to find out, who are the star people, or and how do we connect to them more intimately through these ceremonies?
Yeah, those are really great questions. The stars I find to be one of the most mysterious and mystical aspects of even the traditional healer's journey. And I always think back to what Credo Mutwa, I think, wrote in one of his books about how the star knowledge is like the final phase of initiation with a traditional healer, and that not all healers get to that point, so that you can't expect that knowledge from many healers. And also that he said it's the most difficult to attain from a personal perspective. Of course, I mean, I have deep respect and reverence for Vusamazulu Credo Mutwa and all of his work. I find it to be constantly the layers and layers and layers of depth that constantly come out of his writing whenever I read it. It's amazing. So there's some level of, how do you even put into words what it means to have star knowledge? And yet the stars seem to be deeply responsible for our consciousness as human beings, as humanity. They are our relationship with the heavens is our relationship with our minds as well, or with the big mind of things, meaning also the way in which things are ordered, our understanding of future and past, our way of navigating the 360-degree kind of sense of the world and our world, inner and outer. And there's that sense that, part of it with the indigenous perspective, in some ways, you could say it's deceptively simple, because unlike, like what you say, unlike just basic astrology, for example, which might not emphasize your own relationship with the stars, with indigenous knowledge, the first thing will be like, have you ever gone outside at night and just really felt the light of the stars on your body? Like the relationship of the heavenly bodies and the light of the heavenly bodies to your own body, And then just, again, I mean, very simple things. Okay, so then if you feel that, and if you feel it even here, because I might be a little bit weird, but, I go outside, I can feel, it's like the points, I can just feel that when I go and just really experience the starlight. Then I go back inside the house, there's a roof, there's so on. I feel like, okay, that's not there, Or sleeping under the stars. Have you slept under the stars? What does it do to you, right? How does it open your awareness of the ground and the heavens? How do you align physically? Because I find that a lot of indigenous systems are, again, they're based on relationship. And the issue becomes when, even the spiritual systems from the Northern Hemisphere, I find emphasize much more, they emphasize systems much more. They emphasize a certain kind of, even, it's like a mechanistic spirituality. Things that you don't really have a choice over, things that you don't, it's like a machine, you're in a machine, you're in an astrological machine. This thing affects you this way, this thing affects you that way. Versus, again, this thing of building a relationship, then, it starts with an individual, but then you have a community, then you have a larger community, then you have the context of the earth and so on. And in particular with certain stars and certain constellations, yes, their appearance signals certain things, So the appearance of the Pleiades, that signals the coming of the new year in this part, I mean, at least in Zimbabwe, and then with the beginning of the agricultural season and all of those things. But there's also the relationship of us with the Pleiades. What do they do to us? And then the understanding that our awareness of them is also their awareness of us. So that's also where people start to, they're like, but the stars, even people who, let's say they have some sense of astrology, they'll say, but the stars are far away. How can they have a sense of you? How can you think that the stars are actually aware beings? But then how can you think that they're not aware beings, right? So with the star ceremony, there was, for me, it started in Egypt. I had an inspiration and a call, essentially, in 2020 to go to Egypt for my birthday. It was one of those things. It was very, my ancestors were very pushy, which sometimes they are. Sometimes they'll just be like, you have to go there right now. And I'm always questioning. I'm like, but am I really? Is that really the right thing? So on. So they were extremely pushy. They were like, no, you have to be there on your birthday. And I experienced in Egypt, it was a very magical trip. And I felt like I experienced a complete realignment up here with everything. I remember going, I spent some hours in the Great Pyramid. Just, I went inside, I just sat there. And it's like I could feel these cages, I don't know what else to call them, because they were just these boxes literally on my head, like around my brain, and they were just falling away. And when I came out of there, I just completely had a sense of myself as being a spirit in a body. There was no doubt in my mind that my body is very arbitrary. I mean, it's what I chose. It's something that was there. It's there for a reason. It's a vehicle. But there was that clear sense of like, no, I'm a spirit, and somehow this spirit has something to do with the heavens. It has something to do with the stars that are up there, you know. And then you do have, I mean, certain prominent stars. Like I've definitely built a relationship with Sirius, for example, in that it keeps on showing up. And then again, you have this mutual awareness. And with the star ceremonies, then, if you look at the way that they were done, even in Egypt, the Isis Osiris myth that was done every single year, there were these mystery plays that were performed with the knowledge that certain aspects of those plays were in the temple, not accessible to the public, and certain parts were accessible to the public, you know. So I take that, for me, I took that as a template for our Nyamatsatsi festival in Zimbabwe, the things that are hidden and that underpin the ceremony, and then the things that are public, that are for everyone to, you know, to enjoy and so on, which is actually really very much, you know, most traditional ceremonies are built around some form of that. You know, there are things that the prayers that are done and so on, not everyone is privy to them. And then there's the celebration, everyone is invited, everyone gets to eat, drink, and all that kind of thing. And there's that, just that drive and that key somehow that this ceremony was going to like realign with the heavens, you know, realign with the heavens. That was that clear sense that somehow like our relationship to the heavens has been really affected, really broken. And yeah, we have forgotten the significance of star ceremonies, you know. So you even see in the modern spiritual conversation, we are all talking about the earth, which is wonderful. You know, it's great that we're all talking about the earth and our relationship to the earth and so on. And that's wonderful. But it's like the stars are not part of that conversation. Part of it is that the whole thing of we need to fix our relationship with the earth has an environmental approach, you know. So we can see that we've poisoned the water. We can see that we have hurt the plants. We can see that our climate is changing. We can see all of those things. And then we look up into the heavens and we're like, the stars are still there. The sun is still there, you know. We don't have to do anything about it, which also brings it. It's poor human thinking, you know. It's really spiritually poor thinking to just be like, you know, yeah, they don't need us because they seem to be fine on their own. Right? They're still moving around. But if we do not do star ceremonies, then we are, as humanity, as a group, we will be unable to conceptualize or create society in such a way that is in alignment with both the heavens and the earth. You know, so all of our attempts to fix the earth are actually based on the fact that it's only by realigning with the stars and rebuilding those relationships with the stars that we can actually say, okay, what do we need to do so that from a cosmic perspective, what we are doing is, I mean, the right thing, you know. Because any indigenous, any culture thing or traditional healer will tell you, anytime you do a ritual or a ceremony, the first question you ask yourself is this really the right thing to be doing? Because doing the wrong thing at the wrong time, as you know, it's just as dangerous as not doing anything at all. So there's that sense of like, humanity needs to fix its thinking about everything itself and everything else in order to even be able to tackle some of these other questions, which is which is some I don't know if, again, some of these things I just kind of go off on a tangent, so I'm not sure if I've you know answered or
Spiritual and metaphysical discourse, there's never correct or right answers, because again, like you're saying, it's an intrinsic knowledge as opposed to a written one. So your answer can never be like 100% foolproof in terms of something that can be verified, but comes from that inner knowing. And very profound. I think at the end of the day, you know, it comes down to that divine understanding of, you know, the reality as a cosmic plane, and this just being the stage in which all of this is unfolding on. And to your example about when having no instruments and just being able to tap into the tune of the universe, you get to connect with these celestial bodies more intimately. And I've heard you discuss them as dimensions and portals into different worlds as well. So, I completely resonate with all those answers. I think, my next follow-up one was with regards to, maybe just before I even get to that, I'll just also respond to what you said about Credo Mutwa. So on my second ayahuasca ceremony, similar to your own calling in Egypt, my ancestors were calling me to join my shaman in Kapsuhub, Vataval Bofen. It's where Adam's calendar, or Inzalo Yelanga, is, the stone circle calendar. And we had a very profound experience there. Like, we started off the day on San Pedro, went to all the healing circles. And, in my own journey, I've never really had a formal gobela, as they call them in the traditional circles, initiator who indoctrinates you into, who initiates you into the knowledge system so that you can also pass on that knowledge at a later day and be able to work with people. But in connecting with my own ancestors, I've been relating to them through their works, because my great-grandfather's a scholar and he wrote books on Nguni indigenous languages. And he talks about the Sanusi, which was one of Credo Mutwa's titles. And I remember being there, holding both stones in the center of the calendar. And similar to your experience about things falling off, for me, it was like tapping into that knowledge system in a way that, again, could seem very arbitrary and random to onlookers, because they just see this any old person just sitting there and touching stones. But in your own mind, you know what it is because of the ancestral prompting. You got to go there. And, one of the professors here who passed on a few years ago talks about, relational ontology and how we can receive and understand, understand and develop meaning from our connection with certain tools and items and elements in nature. And that's definitely what it was for me. And later on that night when we left and I did my second ayahuasca ceremony, it wasn't as profound as the first one that I'd had. But funnily enough, when I got to my purge, I ran out of the kitchen, went outside, and started purging right there and there. But I looked at the stars. It's funny, different patterns were showing. And I didn't make anything of it at the time, but just as you were talking about your own relationship with Sirius and some of the other bodies, mine's always been the sun, because in Sesotho culture, Ramaseri is what we call the sun and God for that being. And Jupiter to an extent, just because I've heard its name being mentioned in songs, but I never really thought any deeper about our personal connection with them. But I suppose the reason I was asking that, now leading on to my second question, was how we differentiate that from other Western, understandings of the stars, specifically, now getting onto star seeds and extraterrestrials and all that, and people who might want to conflate the two, especially in the age that we're in now, where there is a cultural revolution to prevent people from co-opting it and using it for their own nefarious purposes or whatever. And I say that also because Credo Mutwa, I don't know if you ever saw that whole interview with David Icke where he goes into like the list of all the aliens. And I've talked to people in indigenous circles who are like, no, that's actually not what we're talking about. We're not actually talking about physical entities from different planets. We're talking about the celestial bodies and constellations our ancestors used to sing to and praise and connect to. And that's what we call the ancestors, as you would call them. So I just wanted to get your commentary on that in the current climate that we're in, where there is all this knowledge that differs about the stars, and some of it obviously borderline touching on eugenics as well, in the sense that it's co-opted so that the most elite alien beings or whatever will be of a certain race and the rest of us will just be, down here. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, and specifically also as now a knowledge keeper of this certain ceremonies in Zimbabwe and so forth, you know, how do you keep that sacred and differentiated from all these other knowledge systems that could obviously try steal from that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, those are really, really good and pertinent questions. And I ask myself those questions a lot as well, all of the time. And when I pray, I'm constantly praying for discernment, for the, you know, the knowing of like to see clearly, to feel clearly, to have some sense of clarity and all of that. Because indeed, when it comes to the alien stories, there's some kind of a hysteria going, you know, going around, or it can be interpreted as such with, you know, these, yeah, you know, these alien beings, they've come and they're taking us over and blah, 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 and all these things. And they actually created us, but they created us to be slaves and yeah, and all this, you know, the hierarchy of the so on, which again, from my perspective, it will seem deceptively simple, but it takes away from that indigenous focus on celebrating life and celebrating the beauty of life and the beauty of things, you know, and the fact that anytime you introduce fear into a conversation about your relationship with anything, you are already, you are, I don't know how to say, you're confusing the ceremonial space, you know. You're giving into some kind of hysteria that has nothing to do with, yeah, building the relationship with the ancestors, let's say. Because if you look at all of the star ceremonies anywhere, has there ever been a star ceremony? Maybe I'm asking everyone now. Has there ever been a star ceremony where people were like, yeah, you know, we need to, I don't know, feed our alien overlords? I've never heard of that, you know. I've only heard of star ceremonies where people celebrate the, also, you know, you look at the Dogon ceremonies, right, with Sirius and so on, and there's a celebration of the journey of that star, not just the celebration of the journey of that star, but also the celebration of the light of that star. Then again, we come back to Egypt. We see the way that architecture respects the light of certain stars at certain times. That's where we talk about calendars, for example. It's the knowledge that the harmony also involves our harmony in walking in the light, equally walking in the darkness, but that it's a dance, it has a rhythm, it has a beauty and a majesty that then we as human beings, we, you know, of course we pray to be graced with it, but also we embody it as well, because we are children of the stars. And not just of the stars, but that sense of, you know, what I find, again, it seems simple, but if it's not beautiful, then probably it's not true. to me, you know. So there's that sense of you know, certainly that, yeah. And then how do you recognize the truth, or the, you know, even when we talk about these, I'm trying to think about all of the aspects of your question now, because you were talking about the just mainly the discernment, I think, right, of the different accounts and aspects. So for me, I am constantly most interested in what I call reality. That sounds very interesting, but you know, I'm constantly interested in reality, and I'm also interested in the spiritual reality. So I want to know what the spirits are doing and what they think about certain things and how they are behaving, you know? So even as you've said, I have a lot of respect for I don't know that you want to call it self-initiates, but the fact that the spirit, even if you have no way of doing a traditional human, you know, gobela or whatever it is, the spirits are still interested in relating to you and with you, you know. The same thing with the stars. It's not like they're not interested in you just because of these things. And so for me, it's that question of how do I say? I mean, I think maybe the lion spirits are a good example here, or can we say all of the lion spirits? Maybe, I don't know. I don't know all of them, but that awareness that you gain when you are shown, and nobody can corroborate this for you, but you are shown because they come and they show themselves to you and they tell you, as they have shown themselves to me, and with that message of we come from the stars. We are star beings, you know? And perhaps there are other beings also that also come in that way from the stars that then say, we are star beings and we are also part of you. We are, you know, the fact that you are stardust also means that we are related somewhere, somehow, and we have certain messages for humanity. But then how do you differentiate that? To be honest, I mean, I'm still working on that one, because it's almost like an intuitive thing. I don't know how to explain it, but for me, it's very intuitive. When I hear foolishness, my reaction is like, this feels foolish. This feels like it doesn't have roots, doesn't have depth. It just seems to be, again, some kind of a mental hysteria around certain narratives of, yeah, certain eugenic narratives about there being better and worse people, or there being better, more aware people and worse people, and also maybe a setup for some kind of a war with aliens, real aliens, fake aliens, I don't know, you know, but it just seems to be kind of hysterical. And so for me, that doesn't have anything to do with the relationship with the spirit, which is heart and depth and humility, and that sense of, you know, even your relationship to light, the light of the sun, the light of the stars, the star people. But then they start appearing, you know, they can appear in dreams, they can appear in even your relationship to time. And then you say, okay, so these star beings are real. It's not that they're not real, they're there, but how are we relating to them? And are we open to relate to all of that on a deeper level, rather than, yeah, what seems to me to be hysteria? So.
Cool, thank you for that. And you know, so many other people within the indigenous circles have said the same thing. Like, it really is more, like you said, an intuitive sort of knowing. And what I like best was what you said about, you know, the moment someone introduces fear into the ceremonial space, you can already kind of start discerning that it's not from an authentic place, because sometimes there is genuine overlap. I mean, I say this specifically in my own understanding of consciousness, which always starts at the base level, which is critical consciousness, like according to Paulo Freire and his pedagogy of the oppressed, you know, knowing your living conditions and the sources or systems of oppression that are keeping you in those living conditions. But our living conditions aren't just rooted in the terrestrial plane. We live inside an entire cosmic body in a universe. And from that perspective, you know, what some of these people who are in the star seed circles say is that really the genuine purpose of that entire school of thought is that they were here to raise consciousness. And it's very profound, because we are in a time of celestial shifting, you know. So in that sense, there are certain people who, without, you know, Western forms of education and so forth, have knowledge and access to such profound truths that from the moment they speak, spirit already has that connection that this is genuine and authentic, and you can take from that, you know. But at certain times, you know, the internet, as broad as it is, there's people using those same terminologies and concepts for completely other different narratives, and it then becomes hard to, you know, kind of, I don't know whether it's a case of associating yourself with the same narrative or disproving them to kind of discredit what they're doing and saying that's not what I am. But I think at the end of the day, you know, as much as there is explosion of information, there's an explosion of deception out there as well, but it comes down to everyone in their spirit and what their ancestors are revealing to them, because it really is a profound inner knowing, like you were saying at the very beginning about, you know, these different knowledge systems. It's not just, one against the other. It becomes with you internalizing it first. So if you haven't got that, you know, you're not going to be known when you're being sold something or not. But I think, you know, in some, as you said towards the end of your answer as well, so eloquently, that we are all stardust. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all specks in this microcosm. So to a certain extent, it is all true. It just becomes whether you're internalizing fear, something at a lower vibration, or you're internalizing truth, something at a higher vibration. But that then does lead on to my second last question, which is obviously in your context, you know, it'd be very valuable to understand your view on, because I know you're a Yale scholar, a Fulbright scholar as well. Mm-hmm. And all those elite Ivy League Western schools, in fact, every Western school is a temple of white epistemology. So the moment you start getting into anything about ancestors or the metaphysical, it just becomes very, very murky. And to a certain point, even taboo, because it comes down to, you know, being able to empirically prove what you're talking about. And if you can't do that, then it's just relegated to esoteric fringe knowledge that's just pseudoscience that we're not even going to accept in these circles, because that's the way the Western knowledge system works, with these, you know, archives of libraries of written knowledge and journals that we use to reference to trail our source of how we got to that understanding. But our whole conversation for this past almost hour has just been about spirits and so forth. So I wanted to find out, you know, with that training and that background you have, how you've come to synthesize this very indigenous spiritual, what some would call airy-fairy or hocus pocus, with very formal, rigid academic training.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I've been I've been unlearning for a long time. I think that's part of it, you know. But I think the thing to understand also in respect to my own path, you know, because the spirit takes us through places and spaces, and in order also for us to be able to function in certain ways, you know. So I look at one of my most profound teachers, Malidoma Somé, who I don't know if you have any knowledge of him. Okay, it's quite interesting, you know, because he's not that well known in Southern Africa. He was a Dagara diviner and healer, and from Burkina Faso. So he passed away last December, but his books you would love. You should definitely look up his books, because he talks about that. He was kidnapped from his village when he was 5, you know, forced to go to seminary. Then he ran away from ceremony. He had to go back to his village. He went through very traditional initiations and processes, and then ultimately was sent to the Western world to help white people with their ancestors, essentially. Like that was the, you know, because the elders of his village said, look, what these people are doing is messing up the balance of things everywhere. And their ancestors are crying for help. So your ancestors are sending you there to you know, to be a conduit, to be that kind of support. So the thing is, in order for him to access that world, he actually went the academic route. He ended up getting 2 PhDs. And at the end of the day, he had 2 PhDs, but what did he do with them? You know, he was a diviner on the road, all his bones and shells. He did ceremonies and rituals with people. He was, you know, and he went, you know, he was very, I mean, he's changed so many people's lives, even just reading his book. Just that thing of, you know, and he definitely changed my life and helped me profoundly. Like, he's definitely one of the healers who was like, he did a lot. So for me, when I look at my academic work from a spiritual perspective, especially now, I see that the spirit was always trying to open certain doors, especially for me to be able to come and work in Zimbabwe. You know, there was a whole learning process that had to take place. You know, when I was at Yale, I wasn't, you know, I was being called because I was experiencing the illness and all kinds of things were happening, but my consciousness wasn't open towards that. So I was learning sociology. I was learning, you know, decolonization narratives, all of those things. But it's like I was learning those things, but without the meat of them, because the meat of them, the heart of the whole conversation is that we need to have a relationship with spirit. We do anyway. We do anyway. And so we can't have a whole academy based on asking people if what they are feeling and experiencing is real, you know? Like it's that fundamental, to me, it's the fundamental distrust of the human being. And it also goes back to in a way, the star ceremony or so on, is the fact that so much of what do we know, what do we not know in the Western context has to do with, we do not trust people. We do not trust people. And then, of course, specifically, we do not trust these people especially and in particular, you know, because we trust ourselves a little bit more than we trust, you know, all of these stories that we are being told, again, from this intellectual perspective. And so the first step, in a way, is for the whole academy to acknowledge the reality of certain realities. I don't know how else to put that, you know. So for me, a good example of that is the rain ceremonies. You know, the fact that in certain places, you know, even in East Africa, so on, I mean, governments are working with traditional healers to say, yeah, when it comes to climate change can't just be a academic Western civilization conversation that has to do with, you know, guilt, and then also a colonizer mentality of, you know, not only is it guilt, but then it has to do with, you know, and then those poor people over there in the Southern Hemisphere are experiencing the consequence of, you know, us using too much oil and so on and so forth. When you need to do rain ceremonies, you know, you need to have a spiritual relationship with the invisible world, because the weather is also just an indication. It's also a spiritual indication. So I guess you could say, you know, what really changed me was, of course, all of the initiation processes, all of the, you know, my own illness, my own so on, because I think for people to really understand even what happens when you have a healer's illness is, again, it's your own conversation with reality. So, you know, so my illness, I had fire in the body and all of that kind of thing. I couldn't move my body. I was completely in what the Western world will call inflammation, right? Everything in my body was burning. But from a traditional indigenous standpoint, my spirit was trying to enter my body, but my body wasn't ready for it. So it was like everything was crooked, you know? So when I went to Western doctors, the only solution they had was to suppress my immune system, to actually shut off my immune system. That was the only thing they could think of. And there you're talking about, you know, basically that thing of, oh, you were born this way, you so on and so forth. But then I come to Zimbabwe and it's like, oh, so your spirit is trying to enter your body. Okay, that's okay. We have, you know, we have tools. We have things that we can do to help the spirit enter the body. And then, so it's not that I had a choice about what to believe. It's that one way worked and the other one didn't, you know, which is the most, to me, again, when it's happening inside of your own body, you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to go with what works. Not only that, but once I figure out what works, I'm going to tell other people about this, because then it's not that thing of, you know, oh, you know, let's have a holistic conversation and respect these other terminologies and so on. It's like, no. Why? I mean, yes, it's an ignorance, but why are people lying to me? You know, like I mean, the difference in my life is profound, because it means I don't need to shut down my immune system. I just need to make sure that my relationship with the spirit is such that when my spirit is trying to come inside of my body, it's not having problems to do so. You know, it's that kind of, you know, so that also really changed and shifted my perspective. So much so that, you know, and then gradually, step by step, you know, these days I'm able to be much more open and even able to then introduce some of these things into communities that, as you pointed out, are completely closed, are somehow like, we can't see things that way. You know, this is all hocus pocus or so on. But then, you know, somebody like me can say, okay, let me show you medical records. Not that anybody has asked me, but, you know, it's that thing of like, I can do that. And I think from a spiritual perspective, from a spiritual standpoint, every person, every human being, the spirit knows exactly what they are doing with you at any moment. And they put you in certain contexts so that you can then go back to those contexts and help those contexts, help, we can say help heal them or help open them up, or be that person in those contexts who, like Malidoma, who did teach at university for a while, knowing what he knew, knowing that, as he writes in the introduction of his book, certain exams, the only reason he passed them was because he had a talisman from his shaman, and, he could read the answers of the questions in the aura of the teacher and so on as he was writing. He was just like, and this was well known in his village. It wasn't a problem. It wasn't a problem, So once you know those things, then it's almost like you become an undercover something or other, I don't know how else to put it, but you are a servant of the spirit. You're not so I think for me, I don't feel at this point in my life, I'm always working on coming out more and more, but certainly with my work, I'm more and more able to, also because there's more and more openness to it, more and more able to be publicly telling the truth, which is also really important. The more people are publicly telling the truth about themselves, who they are, their experiences, how they feel, the more all of these systems are going to change for the better in a quicker and more efficient way.
Cool. Thank you for that. Yeah, my experience was kind of similar. Like when I started this journey through university, the only thing that really did get me going was the fact that the subject matter was on decolonization. But at the same time, I'd be doing rituals on weekends in the park nearby.
Right.
But at the same time, going through a very specific cognitive development way of, intaking knowledge, which was the only way to really get through that system. Otherwise, any other way would have just not sufficed to get through. But I think, to your point on certain parts of your answer, sometimes healers are sent into those circles to expound on the mythology, because that's really what it is. And it gets dismissed as myth because it wasn't written or whatever, but in fact, it was a reality of a certain epoch where the knowledge just wasn't contained in a palatable way. And, I think that is the power of the ceremony. So, in sum, I see we passed the hour mark, so I'm just going to leave it with this last question. Just, around this period that we're in and how to get people interested in these things. I say that obviously knowing that, we are still in very colonial times, especially here in South Africa, regardless of us having been in what's considered Heritage Month, or having had Heritage Day yesterday or 2 days ago. People still want to go to church and go do all those things, and nothing against those. But again, to your point, even those are rituals, but just of a different origin. I mean, you look at all the liturgical practices in the Catholic ceremony, you're doing it, but you're just unconscious of who you're doing it for and to. So my question now, having obviously learned so much from you, which I'm grateful for, is how to scale up this in a way where you share it with people in a very basic way that they understand what they're doing, where it's not going to be perceived as demonic or too out there or too esoteric, in a way where, we're coming together to build community in ceremony and to really bring healing that'll hopefully manifest in other forms of systemic transformation, but not approaching it from the political or liberatory angle first, but specifically from that ceremonial perspective, especially in the times that we're in now, where they say we're in a celestial cosmic shift between two ages. People are waking up to this knowledge, but as we touched on previously, there's also so much misinformation around it as well. So how do we, as ceremonialists, responsibly and ethically bring people into this awareness, and in a practical way, be it according to the calendar, once a month, a weekend, or whatever, or annually, in Yeah, practical ways. Like obviously you've done so many festivals now. So I suppose now my question is getting into everything from, you know, your promotion and marketing to the actual organizing and bringing people into understanding of what they're participating in.
Yeah, no, these are very good questions. And I want to first say that I'm, again, just emphasize that I'm really excited for your journey, you know, as a ceremonialist and as so on, as a person who's just really just keep on doing what you're doing, you know. I'm really excited for it. And I'm sure that you have also whole worlds and things to shift and to, you know, create and to, yeah, that's so I'm very honored to be here and to be a part of that journey, you know. So please keep me updated. Yeah, and yeah, and then when it comes to these ceremonies that, yeah, I mean, especially as ceremonialists, it's not an easy journey. And so that's maybe also why part of my feeling for you, just like, yeah, keep at it, because it is a journey also of leadership, but it's spiritual leadership. And that makes it, you know, the first thing that we always go to is prayer. You know, it's the most powerful thing, because the prayer also allows for any ceremony and any process to be led by the spirit, to be somehow oriented around the truth of the thing, to keep it integrous, to keep it in its authenticity and integrity, you know, to constantly refer back to that. Because then the roots of a thing, even if you do a ceremony and, you know, 2 people, 3 people show up, it's powerful for them, for their ancestors. They tell other people, but also the energy that comes out of that somehow connects with other people and other worlds. And, you know, so it's that thing of waiting, hoping, praying for people's spiritual discernment to wake up. Because as you said, pointed out earlier, and it's just very, very, very true, that people can be using the same words, but they're, you know, they're the so-called false prophets, right? The same structures, the same so on, the same methods, the same traditions, the same, but there's no spirit there, or the spirit there is not the best of spirits. And I actually tend to be very clear on that for myself. I'm not a Buddhist, you know. For me, there is such a thing as good spirit and evil spirit or bad spirit. I've experienced both. I feel like I don't want to deal with one. I want to deal with good spirits. That's my path. And I don't want to meddle or muddle or try to, you know, mix the two or try to be holistic in that way. So we start with prayer, and then we start with the understanding that anytime that we are engaging with people, it becomes difficult sometimes, but to really hold the awareness that you're engaging with their spirits more than you are engaging with the human self, because the human self will react to things. The human self also will sometimes react in fear. If you look at why are so many of these, you know, church circles saying that, you know, maybe tradition is demonic or so on, or even within the church itself, they'll say so-and-so, you know, cut their hair or is growing dreads or so on. That's demonic, you know, somewhere, somehow, even if it's about Jesus. And all of that, again, you feel somebody is afraid of something. Somebody is, but is it the person who's afraid of it? Or is it something that they are carrying that is afraid of it? Or is it there's some inability that they have for their, you know, they don't want to feel the pain of their ancestors. So they're constantly blocking that with some sense of fear, some sense of, you know, I can be safe in this space. I can be safe in this space. And it takes, you know, again, prayer and humility to then say, if the spirit wants to do something through me, please let me stay in integrity, please. And let me also know that it's not that the results necessarily will be, you know, wonderful. Like sometimes the spirit wants you to do a ritual act that on the surface seems like you're hurt in the process. You know, for me, Nzara was a big lesson in that, you know, the ritual act of performing Nzara, but then Nzara was shut down. as a theater play in Zimbabwe, you know, before it was made into a movie, before that whole story. Like ultimately it came out okay. But the initial ritual act where I was told, essentially, I had the sense like, yeah, perform the play. The reaction from the environment was shut down, not because it was bad, but because some ritual acts are so strong that the reaction is equally strong, the initial reaction, that fear-based initial reaction. And then we again have to pray that the vessel that we are, or the vessel that we've created, is strong enough to then kind of absorb the fear and turn it into love, that we don't treat it as just fear, you know? It's a constant, it's really like, it's a very profound thing, you know, the whole thing. And then, you know, so then the same thing with putting out certain calls, like for the Nyamatati festival, where we put out the call for, you know, the star ceremony and so on. And again, recognizing that certain people will feel called, having the discernment of who is called to that, who is not called to that, and then respecting their ancestors, their communities, you know, kind of that thing of being okay with, if you want to call it starting small, you know, being okay with the fact that it'll be this many people this time, this many people, maybe more people the next time, more people the next time, because we're in a huge cultural and spiritual shift. But yeah, I would go back to definitely to prayer and to trust, and also, again, that spirit emphasis on doing the impossible. The spirit likes to show off. It really does. So yeah.
I appreciate that. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to leave it at that. So do send me the recording afterwards. So
yes. Thank you so much for just for being you, and definitely, you know, especially for Nyamatsatsy next year, we're going to have a lot more people from South Africa, and I don't know, I would love also if there was some way for you to be involved. So just keep me updated on what you're doing and things.
Likewise with calendar, with your event. So I was gonna say, I want to do something experimental with some of your videos. Well, I mean the sound clips on them. So when I record this, would it be okay if I just edited some of those in as well and just played around with those and make some cool beats and what the spirit leads me into?
Feel free. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So cool. Thank you so much and have a lovely day. And I'll send you the recording just now.
All the best.
Cheers.